Identity is about sameness, but it's a concept that goes much deeper than it first appears. Same can mean different things in different contexts. We have qualitative identity. This is when things share properties, like two apples that look and taste the same. They are the same kind of thing, sharing characteristics. Then there's numerical identity. This is a stronger form of sameness. Numerical identity is a tricky concept to grasp fully. It seems simple at first glance. A thing is identical to itself, meaning it is one and the same. But this leads to deeper philosophical questions that challenge our understanding. What does it truly mean for something to be itself and not something else? How do we know something remains the same over time despite changes? We often define numerical identity in a circular manner. A thing is identical to itself and nothing else, but this definition is not very informative. This doesn't tell us much about the nature of identity. Philosophers use Leibniz's law to delve deeper into the concept of identity. This law states that identical things share all properties, without exception. If X and Y are identical, anything true of X must also be true of Y. This seems obvious at first, but it leads to interesting puzzles and paradoxes when we consider how things change over time and still remain the same. Logic helps us understand identity formally. We use predicates to describe properties, we use quantifiers to talk about all or some, and we use connectives like and, or identity predicates or I predicates express identity. Within a logical theory, these are extensionally equivalent. This means they pick out the same objects, but this doesn't guarantee they express true identity. A theory's language might not distinguish identical items. Quine suggested a way around this. We can reinterpret theories, we change the references of parts of sentences, but we keep the truth conditions the same. This reinterpretation allows the I predicate to express identity. This works for any two-place predicate expressing an equivalence relation, but it's not always guaranteed to work. Peter Geach challenged the idea of absolute identity. He argued that only relative identity exists. He said there's no way to tell if a predicate expresses absolute or relative indiscernibility. Geach rejected the classical notion of identity. He criticized second-order language definitions. He saw them as paradoxical. He also criticized Quine's reinterpretation proposal. He thought it led to too many entities. Geach believed identity statements are sortily relative. X is the same A as Y is not simply X is an A, Y is an A, and X equals Y. Sortal terms categorize things. For Geach, these terms don't always imply indiscernibility. This is a key point of disagreement with Wiggins. Even if two things are both apples, they might not be the same apple. This is relative identity. A criterion of identity is a standard for judging identity. Frege and Wittgenstein emphasized this concept, but it's not easy to define. It seems to lack unity. For abstract objects, the criterion is an equivalence relation. Think of parallelism for directions or equinumerosity for numbers. These relate distinct objects. For concrete objects, it's different. The criterion is often a relation R. If X and Y are of type F, then X equals Y if and only if Rxy. This doesn't relate distinct entities. We also distinguish between synchronic and diachronic criteria. Synchronic criteria concern parts at a single time. Diachronic criteria concern identity over time. Section 5. Identity over time. Identity over time is a classic philosophical problem. Things change. How can something be the if it's different? Two main theories address this: perdurance and endurance. Perdurance theory says objects have temporal parts. These parts exist at different times. The whole object is a four-dimensional entity. It exists in space-time. Endurance theory says objects are wholly present at different times. They don't have temporal parts, they through time. This is closer to common sense. Lewis argued for perdurance. He focused on tensed properties. These are properties that change over time. Perdurance explains these easily. Endurance struggles. Section 6. Identity across possible worlds. Modal logic talks about possibility and necessity. We often talk about identity across possible worlds. This helps us understand modal properties. But this idea faces challenges. A bicycle could have different parts. but not different parts. If we imagine a series of possible worlds, we run into problems. We might end up with mereological essentialism. This says an object's parts are essential to it, or we might reject cross-world identity altogether. Lewis's counterpart theory offers a solution. Instead of identity, we use a counterpart relation. This avoids some of the problems. Section 7. Contingent identity. Kripke argued that identity statements are necessary. If A equals B is true, it's true in all possible worlds. But some philosophers disagree. They believe in contingent identity. Gibbard's example of a statue and its clay illustrates this. The statue and the clay are identical, but they could have had different modal properties. Lewis argued that personal identity with one's body is contingent. Counterpart theory helps explain this. Contingent identity is possible if counterparts aren't identical. Section 8. Composition as identity. The composition as identity thesis links mereology, the study of parts and wholes, with identity. The strong version says composition identity. The weak version says it's to identity. Lewis noted similarities between composition and identity. They share properties. The relation is necessary. Composition is unique, it's extensional, and composed objects exist when their parts do. But this thesis faces challenges. Hybrid identity statements like the bricks equal the wall seem ungrammatical, and it's hard to give them truth conditions. The biggest challenge is Leibniz's law. How can many things be identical to one thing? Section 9. Geach versus Lewis, a philosophical showdown. Geach and Lewis represent opposing views on the nature and concept of identity. Geach champions the idea of relative identity, arguing against a universal absolute concept that applies uniformly. He sees identity as always tied to a specific kind or sort, making it inherently contextual. This perspective suggests that identity is dependent on the criteria used for comparison, varying across different contexts and categories. Lewis, on the other hand, leans towards a more absolute view of identity, particularly when combined with his counterpart theory. While acknowledging the complexities of identity across possible worlds, his framework allows for a broader understanding that transcends specific sorts or kinds. Counterpart theory provides a way to navigate the challenges of transworld identity, even if it doesn't fully align with Geach's relative approach. The debate between these two perspectives highlights the core challenges in defining and understanding identity, sparking intense discussions and reflections. Is identity a fundamental relation inherent in the objects themselves, or is it a construct imposed by our categorizations and criteria? This profound question continues to fuel ongoing philosophical inquiry, driving scholars to explore and debate the essence of identity. Section 10. Conclusion and further exploration. The concept of identity is far from simple. It is a multifaceted and deeply intricate subject that touches upon various aspects of our lives. We've explored different types of identity, criteria for determining identity, and how these criteria can vary, depending on context and perspective. We've also examined the challenges of identity over time and across possible worlds, considering how identity can evolve and transform. We've delved into the complexities of contingent identity, understanding how identity can be dependent on various conditions and circumstances. Additionally, we've explored the relationship between composition and identity, and how the parts make up the whole. The debate between philosophers like Geach and Lewis highlights the ongoing discussion surrounding the nature of identity. This debate underscores the complexity and depth of the topic, showing that identity is not a settled issue but a dynamic field of inquiry. Is it absolute or relative? This question challenges us to think about the nature of truth and reality. Is it fundamental or constructed? This question invites us to consider the role of society and culture in shaping our identities. These questions continue to shape our understanding of ourselves and the world around us, influencing how we perceive and interact with others. For further exploration, consider reading works by Frege, Wittgenstein, Quine, and other influential philosophers. Kripke, Geach, Lewis, and many others have contributed to this rich and complex philosophical discussion. Engaging with their works can provide deeper insights and provoke further questions about the nature of identity. The journey into the nature of identity is a journey into the heart of what it means to be, to exist, and to persist through time and across possibilities. It is a profound exploration that can lead to greater self-awareness and a deeper understanding of the human condition.